Hi,
Hello,
Susie.
how are you?
Oh, wait. Yeah. Now I can hear you.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't have my speakers on.
oh. Well, now you do.
Yes. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yes, I know, you're eating.
Sorry. Just one moment. I just
Okay,
have to draw up another text.
okay. I'm a little early.
No, that's fine. Actually, you can probably still see me as I'm.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now I can go back to Zoom. I just wanted to call up a second text.
Mm-hmm. I'm expecting my cleaning people to come, and so I might have to get off for a few minutes at 12:30 if they come on time.
I understand.
This time of year, I need them.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Hmm.
So let me excuse me one more moment.
Okay.
I thought I had my phone here. Hmm. I do not know where I put my phone.
Oh.
Oh, well. You're going to
So
tell
did your
us.
wife tell you that I met Alona at
Yes.
at the
Allison told me this story. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah. I saw her shirt and I was like, is that Hebrew? But it looked like Hebrew. So then was thinking, do I go over to her? I don't know her, but I went over to her and said, excuse me, is that Hebrew on your shirt? And she said, not only that, but on my arm, she had a tattoo, and that's
Oh,
Hebrew also. And I said, oh, all right. And she said, I'm Israeli. But by that time I could tell because of her accent.
right.
Yeah,
Please excuse my chewing.
that's okay.
There we go.
Hi,
Hello.
Rabbi. How are
Good morning.
you?
Chodesh Tov.
Kodesh
Yeah,
Tov.
right.
How are you doing?
Good. A little bit sore. I went skiing yesterday.
Oh, wow. Fun.
Oh, where'd
So
you go?
up at Shawnee
Yeah. Is it okay? I mean, do they have snow?
with this rain, probably not anymore. A lot of bald patches.
Yeah,
But for what little I do, it was just fun to get out.
yeah.
But it was like I think there were maybe 20 people on the whole mountain.
Oh, wow.
It was like really
Yeah.
nice. It's a lot of solitude there.
Never
My
thought you'd have your own private ski
my
slope.
daughter has a house up in Wyndham, and it's right near the ski resort. I could see the ski resort from her house, but you can't, it's too far away to actually see skiers. You don't see them at all. But her husband took the kids on Sunday and they had a good time.
I never learned to ski,
No, me
despite living in the
neither.
foothills of the Poconos.
Yeah, I didn't learn either. I went twice, but I borrowed skis both times, and that was a mistake.
No, I've got my own. My mother was a
Yeah.
ski instructor in Germany,
Oh,
Wow.
amongst other things. That she liked to do that in the winter vacations and things. And she taught me when I was in grade school.
mm-hmm.
I never got really good or anything. I could ski very slowly, have a helmet because
Right.
a former congregant, a couple of congregations ago, was a great skier, but
But
got an
fell.
ice patch, and he ended up in the hospital
Oh,
with a concussion.
my God.
He was in the hospital for like 3 weeks.
Hmm.
Wow.
So I heard that and I said, okay, I'm buying a helmet.
Yeah, really. You learned your lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, for me, winter was swim season. So I was too busy in swim practice and swim meets. And
Good
also,
morning, Yehudi.
good morning, Yehudi.
Good morning, Yudi. Hoda stove.
So,
Boker Tov, Rabbi Papke, Boker Tov, Rabbi Zucker. Now let's hope we have a few more people to say Boker Tov too. Remember, it's still Boker. Daylight saving times makes Boker last till 1 o'clock.
right, that's
Yes,
true.
it
True.
does.
At least on the Jewish.
Well, that's why I
calendar.
say Boker.
Yeah. So in a minute, let me just start
You
sharing.
can't have a mincha till 1:30 or so. Because it has to be a certain amount of time after Chatzot, and Chatzot is a little bit after 1. Okay, we're an hour. Now we're up to the
Oops,
principal
that's
type
one.
of sacrifice. But Milgram doesn't like that word and changes it to offering. This is Levine. This is Baruch Levine.
Right.
He's okay too.
Yeah, this is
We
me.
call them the twins.
Do you know if anybody else is coming?
I don't know. I don't know. No one. I don't think anyone mentioned to me.
Okay. Oh, I wanted to ask you, how is oh wait, if I could think of her name it would help. Armis. Nadine.
Oh, I don't know. I called her and I didn't get the machine.
Oh,
So I'm gonna try again. Made a number of
okay.
calls this week and
Yeah. And how is Charlotte doing?
Charlotte's doing much better.
Good.
She's doing much better. But,
Yeah, that's what I heard from my sister-in-law and brother-in-law yesterday.
oh, okay, good. They had the latest because the last I spoke to her was
Thank you.
Sunday, I think.
Listen, Charlotte's done something that I never could think of doing, which is she's managed to be 87 for the last 6 years.
I'd almost say 85. She does pretty well, thank God.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to be shortly. Couple of more months.
I'm just gonna. I really don't know where everybody is.
Why don't you get started, Rabbi Pop?
Carol didn't mention anything to me. So, yeah, you're right. We'll get started. But actually, let me get to the other sheet. Is frankly, what I was thinking of. There we go. Sorry, I just have to move things around on my screen so I could see. And let me.
Whose sheet is this?
Where is Zoom? Here we go. All right. I think we're going to skip some of the stuff, but I wanted to begin really before we start reading Vayikra to think about Vayikra. How do we think about this book? Because unfortunately, there are those that get to this book and go, "Oh, we have to read about sacrifice." And of course, one, that's not the entire book, but there are different ways to put this in perspective. This is the central book of the Torah. I mean, literally, you have Bereshit and Shemot on one side, but Midbar and Devarim on the other, and you've got Vayikra right in the middle. And it is dealing with, as we'll see, our relationship with God, which is, of course, a major concern of the entire Tanakh. So let's take a look at this
Besides,
beginning
what's
part
wrong
here.
with asking people to make sacrifices?
Pardon me?
What's wrong with asking people to make sacrifices?
Yeah, well,
They
that's
should
also a
make
problem.
sacrifices once in a while.
Yeah.
No. In other words, the idea that you're turned off by the very thought of making sacrifices shows where my modern mind is. Who would ever think of voluntarily bringing a sacrifice?
Right. Well, here's Maddie. Well, actually, all the women would have an excuse for not being here because it's Rosh Chodesh. So,
Right. Yay.
Celebrating it as a holiday.
Barak.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
Maddie.
Maddie.
Hi.
Chodesh Tov.
Maddie.
Chodesh Tov.
Hi. I
Okay.
have you guys on high, but I can't hear you so well. Can you hear me?
Really?
We hear you
Yes,
just fine.
we can hear you great.
Okay. I just don't know how to make you louder. Let me see. Maybe it's two different things. Oh, see, there you go. Speak, people. Let me hear you.
Okay.
Hello.
Much better.
4 people.
Okay.
All right.
You
Perfect
figured
timing.
it out.
Just
Can't get
about to
the
start.
point of making a sacrifice.
Yeah. We are, we're sacrificing now because we're meeting online rather than in person where we can really enjoy each other's company. So, as I mentioned, I really want to start before we look into at least one element of the parasha. Probably not going to have time to do anything more. To think about Leviticus itself. How do we think about this book that is the central book of the Torah? Oh, we have another person just joined. There's a cardinal right out my window.
Say hi to your parents.
Yeah.
But does she have a computer?
No.
Oh, yes, I have a
There
red
he
hat.
goes. Yeah, saw we were studying Vayikra, flew off. What can I say?
It heard.
Yeah.
So what I think of when I hear Vayikra is it was David's Parsha.
Oh,
That's very cute.
Yeah. And actually, there is a piece that Ismar Shorsh did for for JTS Online, and he talks about how this was his son's parasha.
mhm.
So, some of us have relationship to certain parshiot that just,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to take a look at two selections. I think we may pass in the third so we can get a little bit something out of the parasha. But two perspectives to think about this book that I think are very important perspectives. So the first one was from a 19th century rabbi, David Tzvi Hoffman, who did a whole commentary on the Vayikra, which has been sitting on my shelves. And, I look at a comment here and there, and then I thought, I want to see what he says about the book at the beginning. And I found two paragraphs that were very, very interesting. Hopefully you'll find them as interesting as I found them interesting. But, that's...
You got a Hebrew typo.
Yeah.
Your second HaKohanim.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. You put it stuck in a nun.
That's why Rabbi Poppy underlined it so we wouldn't mess it up.
Yeah. Let me make sure I'm in the right language here. So, okay, thank you. So who would like to read?
I will.
Okay, thank you, Susie.
However, most of our sages customarily refer to our book as Torah Kohanim because most of its laws are concerned with the service of the Kohanim in the sanctuary or laws for the Kohanim in general. Yet, also from another perspective, it is fitting this book is named Torah Kohanim because it is for the greater part instructions to Israel in the rule of a kingdom of priests.
Actually, the Hebrew there is Torah. Where is it?
Kohanim.
Torah Mamlechet Kohanim. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Torah can be translated in many ways. I just use the word rule. It could be instruction, which might be better here, frankly. But finish off the sentence.
How to strive toward attachment to God and holiness.
Yeah. So, what is Mamlechet Kohanim? Where does that phrase come from?
On Torah.
Yeah.
The guy Kadosh, that's very sharp on Hoffman's war.
Yeah, very.
First half of the book is Mamlechet Kohanim. That goes up to chapter 16. And the second half of the book from 17 to 27 is Guy Kadosh. That's really, that's a very nice insight.
Yeah, no, I think he's very insightful here. But he's taking the fact that we call this book Torah Kohanim, and that was also name often given to the Sifra, which is the early rabbinic commentary on Vayikra. And he's saying, this is teaching us to be Mamlechet Kohanim. And he goes on, which I think also very clever. Go ahead, Susie.
There are two demands that God makes before giving the giving of the Torah at Sinai. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests, and you shall be to me a holy nation.
Yeah, it's in the same sentence, actually. But
yeah. These two demands, each of which is its own purpose, nevertheless, the fulfillment of one demand is a means to fulfill the second. Within the rule of Kohen,
again,
Israel,
Torah Kohen. So, that's a rule, instruction. Okay. You could even say here in the role of Kohen, because we're Mamlechet Kohanim.
Israel strives for attachment to God, to strive for him, so that God will fulfill his promise, and I will place my dwelling in your midst, and I will walk in your midst.
Yeah, so that's that's part of the role of the Kohen, to make the place fit for God. In this case, the community. We have to make ourselves fit for God. Okay, go on.
And I will place my. Oh no, I read that.
Yeah.
That is a goal in and of itself. But along with this, it is a means to transform us into a holy nation, to raise us to the level of divine holiness and moral perfection, so that in our private and public lives, we will aim to the good and upright and finding God's favor. This last point is a goal in and of itself, but along with this, all of us, as Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says in the Kutzari, the Holy Spirit, in order that we reach the level of prophecy and we will be prepared to present as guides to all of humanity as representatives of God's will.
I think it's a particularly powerful paragraph. That this book of Vayikra is all about turning us into Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. And that involves in our striving toward God as being an example for other people. I couldn't find the section in the Kuzari that really uses this term, and I can't say I know the Kuzari particularly well, or well at all, to be honest. But in the area where I was looking,
putting it together, this isn't what Kuzari never says that the way to get to Ruach HaKodesh is through Sefer Vayikra. Hoffman's saying that.
Yes.
Kuzari just simply says the way to get, we should all try to attain the status like Moshe Umi can't call Am Hashem Nevi'im.
Right.
So the other bit is, Hoffman's reading this in. He does. If you drop the last paragraph, you're not losing anything, because the fact is that Vayikra is really not a manual to how to achieve Ruach HaKodesh. That's just pushing it. That's medieval Jewish philosophy. That's definitely not, what anybody would think of when they read Sefer Vayikra.
Except that I think his point is much more that, if we are supposed to be Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, and Sefer Vayikra is about
Just the prophecy.
Dvarim Kedoshim and Kohanim, then in some ways it does serve as a manual in a certain sense, that these are the topics that it covers, and we learn from these topics. And I think it's clear that we learn because of the totality of type of mitzvot in Sefer Vayikra. It's definitely, it covers so much. Yes, some of it is specifically to the Kohanim, but certainly not all of it. It's dealing with sacred time, it's dealing with sacred space, it's dealing with sacred behavior, whether the most private types of behaviors to the most public types of behavior. What many commentators point out, and I think that we understand well, is that whereas some people have problems with Vayikra because it seems to be concerned with, I know you don't like this term, but with ritual or with rites, and we much prefer the more ethical standards. Well, smack dab in the middle of Vayikra is one of the most beautiful sections on interpersonal relations. So in many ways, Vayikra is very, very comprehensive, and is very important for us as Jews to understand. It's very nice, the drasha, that we teach Vayikra first because children let the pure come and study about the pure. That's very nice. But I think that our tradition understood that this is the guts of our tradition. The stories are very, very important. Obviously, you can't disconnect whether it's the legal sections or Vayikra from the rest of the Tanakh, from the rest of the Torah, but all of these things are there.
There's a very nice saying, Rabbi Papi, that the pasuk to apply to Vayikra is "V'habriach hatichon b'toch hakarashim, mavriach min hakatzeh el hakatzeh." I'll let you translate it for the benefit of anybody.
And then there are various boards that are used to support the posts in the Mishkan, and then there's one larger one that is supposed to connect the ends and hold it all together. So that's really nice that verse, which we just read last week,
Yeah.
and a few weeks before,
And we discussed it in here on our weekly thing, those verses.
Yeah. And that to see Leviticus is kind of that board, that support that really holds it all together. That's a nice it's a nice teaching. So that, when people say, "Ugh, Leviticus," I have to say, "Hey, Leviticus!" It's not that I find absolutely everything to be fascinating, but I do find a lot of it to be quite fascinating. And especially, of course, when you read through our friend Milgram, and not just Milgram. I mean, the work of Baruch Levine, the work of so many scholars on this book, as well as our traditional Mefarshim. And we understand the different meanings, whether the meanings that probably inhere in the text itself, or meanings that we have applied to the text. Vayikra is an incredibly rich book. And I think if we go in with the perspective that this is really important, we will find very important and very powerful statements there, even if it's also very, very disturbing at times. The two narratives in the book deal with people dying, the blasphemer and, of course, the sons of Aharon. But it's dealing as well with life, with death. It's a very, very powerful book. And I can understand how Milgram devoted his life to the priestly traditions and produced one of the largest books that Doubleday ever published. Any comments, questions, additions?
In part, though, I know Milgram, I think he even says it at one point. How did he come to decide to study Leviticus? Nobody really had done it when he was wanted to start his doctorate in Virginia. And initially they were horrified. Why would you want to do anything on that? But nobody had. So he specialized in that. But I would also call to mind that particularly in this early stuff where we have so much material on the Korbanot, you look at Hasidic drash. It's unbelievably incredible what moral lessons they pull out of the material. I have volumes, Penine Hasidut, which pulls its collections of material. And when I was through the years trying to find what am I going to preach on Vayikra or Tzahav, incredible stuff.
Yeah, and in fact, I have to say, in my own personal study, I fell in love with another work called Iturei Torah, which has been partially
That's a good
translated.
book, Rabbi Papi.
Yeah,
Great
and
Torah.
it's
That's hard to get, but that was
Yeah.
just published in what is that? Fragments from Geniza stuff, right? It's a medrash that goes back to 113.
no. Iturei Torah, they translate it in the English translation. They call it Torah gems, and
this is something else.
yeah, and it's basically drashot,
Right.
or short little drashot on the Torah, but leaning very, very heavily on the Hasidic material.
And there's also a volume in English from Friedman.
Keep talking.
Friedman, Wellsprings of Torah.
Mm.
And Bamberger's parish on it in the Reform Chumash Plout is also very good.
Yeah,
You know?
and another work that draws heavily on Iturei Torah is now I'm blanking on it. I moved the book downstairs, so I don't have it sitting here in front of me. But it's by Olitsky and Kushner, Larry Kushner, and they really draw on a lot of Hasidic material, a lot of which came from Iturei Torah, and they explain who the person was, and they explain the teaching itself. But a lot of, Vayikra has also, I think that's a great point, Rabbi Zucker, in that, even for all the work that Milgram may have done on the pshat of the text and understanding the religious ideas of the text, our tradition has been incredibly creative and has done magnificent work on some of this stuff. And, we can think even of the, just covering all the stuff on the Mishkan. We've had wonderful drashot. And it's not the pshat commentary, but the drashot, the most famous one, for recently is, the idea that the ark, the Aron, was not just overlaid with gold, but inlaid with gold. It had a gold interior, and wonder why. It's like, you understand, on the outside is really nice. Why do you need it in the inside as well? And say that's how a Talmud Chacham should be. Toko kivoro. Inside should be like the outside. There should be integrity and wholeness. So beautiful. Anyway, let's move on to another perspective on Vayikra from Rabbi Michal Shekel, who lives in Toronto. I happen to think she's a very, very bright woman. And I did have a chance to meet her and her husband. Were lovely people. And she's very well read, and she brings her knowledge of literature into understanding the text. She wrote these weekly parasha things for the kollel in an egalitarian kollel in Toronto. But she brings another perspective that I think is very, very important. Somebody want to go on?
I will.
Okay. Thanks, Maddie. You're the one who's left.
But you never thought of Leviticus as a love story, but it is. The rituals of the relationship are quite obvious as detailed through the korbanot, the offerings that are discussed in the beginning chapters of the book. The root of korban, KRB,
That's kufresh bet.
kufresh bet, means to bring close or draw near. The sacrifice as a romantic dinner. The ritual details are similar to the etiquette of a Jane Austen novel. You know what to expect, what is expected of you, and you certainly know when things are out of place.
I think she might be the only person who ever said that it's comparable to a Jane Austen.
Yep.
Everything is carefully controlled and choreographed. In these 19th century novels, this is done through arranged visits, dinners, and dances. In Leviticus, it is the order, rites, and procedures that draw our attention.
See, she uses the word rites, not rituals. So, good for her there.
Of course, this description does not do justice to the book of Leviticus, which is more than an infatuation or romance. It is an enduring love story. Nowhere is this more evident that in the very first of the opening parsha, Hashem called Vayikra to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting.
Yeah, it's like, come, let's talk. Let's be together.
Leviticus
I'm
is
skipping
all
a
about
number of the sections that she writes.
Leviticus is all about maintaining a loving relationship between God and Israel. Some of the korbanot suggest romantic dinners, as mentioned above. Others are the regular meals that are a major part of any marriage. A number of these offerings are vital to restoring harmony. They represent a way of healing a troubled relationship. In the 1970s bestseller Love Story, Eric Siegel wrote that love means not ever having to say you're sorry. Not so. Vayikra, through its focus on ritual purity and sacrifices, teaches that saying, I don't see that. You need to move up.
Oh, sorry.
Teaches that saying and showing you're sorry is essential to a lasting and loving covenantal relationship.
Now, of course, this is a drasha, but I think it's rather clever in that this book, as the entire Torah, is about our relationship with God. And the relationship is presented very often throughout the Tanakh, throughout our tradition, as a kind of loving relationship. And we see the relationship between God and Israel as a marriage. And when the prophets, later tradition, talks about how Israel has rejected God or turned away from God or just treats God poorly, there's the sense, you can't help but feel that sense of hurt and rejection. And it's not just, somebody comes into your store and doesn't buy your product. But no, it's God and Israel have a relationship. And we often use love as the term for that relationship. I mean, yes, ahava in Sefer Devarim has other connotations, but still, v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol levavcha v'kol nafshecha. You know, that's a very powerful statement. It's not really regulating emotion. We know that, but it's hard not to feel that there's an element of emotion involved. And, you know, again, that comes out much more in the prophetic writing, but it's a fascinating perspective, I think, to come to Sefer Vayikra and go, you know, this whole book is about our relationship with God, about how we draw near to God, how we have God living among us, as it were, or to quote the section that Hoffman mentioned before, that God will dwell among the Israelites and will walk among them. The Mishkan is there in the midst of the community. And
Interestingly enough, the word you just emphasized, ahava, in this book is never used for relationship between humans and Hashem.
God.
It's only used for relationships between you and other human beings, either v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, or for the ger v'yahavta kamocha.
Yeah. So you know, like I said, this is a drasha, but it's still it's understanding that we are in relationship. And I think that's a very useful perspective when approaching Vayikra, to look at it not as simply a list of rites and practices, as important as those may be, and as central as those may be, but what is the purpose of all of those rites? You know, we want to have a good relationship with God. And to think of Vayikra as really talking about that, I think puts a different spin on the book than a lot of people generally apply to it. So, as she said, bet you never thought of Leviticus as a love story, you know? I personally think it's as dry as it is. It's far better than Eric Siegel's love story. I read that like in 6th grade, and I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world.
But the movie was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it had, but you know, and it's this kind of romantic notion that is absurd. You don't need Vayikra to know that love means not ever having to say you're sorry. That's ridiculous. You know, if you love somebody, you want to say you're sorry when you make a mistake, when you've done something wrong, when you've hurt someone. But even so, I just think it's a fascinating take on the book. And together with Hoffman, we see Vayikra is, they're both so central in the sense of who are we supposed to be as Jews? What is our relationship with God? What are our responsibilities to do? And what are we working on? And just, I don't really want to spend a lot of this because it's much longer, but not that long ago, in 57-78, former Chancellor Arnold Eisen did a piece for the Torah from JTS, and he tells the story that he's a cruise ship in Alaska, and they became friendly with the couple, and then, you know, he finally gets the question that Jews have heard for centuries from Christians, and he said, even as students by Stanford, how can Jews worship the God of the Old Testament, so full of harsh judgment and wrath, so unlike the God of the New Testament who calls to human beings in love? And as we know, that's totally not correct. It's not correct about the Tanakh. It's not really correct about the New Testament either.
Definitely not.
You know, in fact, there was someone, I no longer have the paper, but there was some rabbi, I think, for teaching with the Christian community, who drew up all these lines from the Torah or Tanakh, and like how beautiful, you know, how much God, you know, all about God's love and compassion and et cetera, and then a whole slew of quotes from the New Testament that are anything but compassionate and kind. So we know that's
Besides, half of that compassionate stuff they stole from the Tanakh,
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
lifted it straight out of the Tanakh, and they just, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, that's Vanavim Yeshueret, and there's no end of situations
Right.
like that.
Yeah, there was a great story along those lines where that there was some I don't know, community-wide social action project or something. And I don't remember where it was. I just remember hearing it from the rabbi, and I don't even remember who the rabbi was, but he said that on all of the promotional material that went out, the materials that went to the churches quoted the verse, "V'ahavta l'orecha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself. And to all the materials that went out to the Jewish communities, to the synagogues, it wrote, "Tzedek, tzedek tirdof," justice, justice shall you pursue. And the rabbi asked, why didn't you just use the same quote? He said, well, we didn't want to insult you by using a quote from our Bible.
Very good, Rabbi Popke.
And he goes on, I explained patiently, I hope, that I, like most Jews I know, do not experience God or the Hebrew Bible that way. The prayers we recite overflow with expressions of love, and the injunction to love at the very center of the Torah in chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, we find the instruction that Jesus said was the most important of all, to love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Akiva too called this the great principle of the Torah. And if we remember in the negative formulation, Hillel also used it. Love is an integral part of the aim of holiness to which Leviticus calls its readers. Not taking vengeance, treating strangers, and sorry, I can't read that. And the needy well, offering sacrifices properly on the altar, observing Shabbat, and performing dozens of other acts of justice and kindness. This is, you can't read Tanakh and not even Leviticus without having a sense of the compassion and love that is in the book. Susie?
Yeah, in a lot of our prayers, the word ahava or the shoresh aleph hey vet, it's in the prayers a lot.
Yeah.
So that's another point to that.
And what do we recite on fast days? In the Torah reading, and what do we recite as part of the slichot prayers as the constant refrain? But the Shalosh Esrei Midot.
Right.
All right, it's slightly edited and we cut out the part about God punishing people for many generations. But the fact is that, that is a very prominent part of our liturgy. And as well, when on Shalosh Regalim, when we take the Torah out of the ark, if it's a weekday.
I mean, the very point, what you said we cut out is the rabbinic willingness to say we know better, and we can force God to be kinder by leaving that. A Protestant would say, "How can you do that?" Catholic might be okay with it, but a Protestant would be upset by
Rabbi Zucker. That's not just the rabbis. The later prophets were ready, taking the original formulation in Shemot and taking out all the bad stuff and reformulating it as if only the good part is there. Not only later prophet, the book of Psalms. What happened to the rest of it? I mean, I could find you at least 7 verses in the Nevi'im Achronim and in Tehillim, that 7, probably closer to 10, in which this same operation is done. In other words, the rabbis didn't have to basically come up with this on their own. They've got about 10 precedents in Tanakh itself for doing that.
Yeah, which demonstrates that, this is the overwhelming emotions and ideas that want to be conveyed. And again, kind of like what Rabbi Shekel had said here, Professor Eisen writes, I believe that it's worth pausing as we prepare to enter the precincts of Leviticus once more. Sorry, I have to move this so I can see it. To think a bit about love. Let's stipulate at the outset that the Torah, as much as philosophers and poets throughout the ages who have written about the matter, understands that there is more than one sort of love and believes that these varieties of love are integrally related. That's also a part of Vayikra, and I mentioned before, talking about life and death, intimate relations, and loving a neighbor, loving a stranger. It's in
And
fact,
regard for the poor, one of the main things that's stipulated in this parsha, in Parshas Vayikra, is the fact that when a sacrifice is obligatory, as distinguished from voluntary, then a poor person gets all kinds of discounts. I don't know what word I would use here, but the requirement is dropped down to the point that at one point they tell you that a poor person can, if they're really poor, they can come up with a sacrifice of grain, which means that there's no bloodshed. You go to what you would think is the basic requirement of a carbon, of a required carbon. So, and in other words, it's very clear all through this book that, concessions are made in all the rituals, and this time I will use the word rituals because that's what I think Vayikra is about. At least a great deal of it is about rituals. Concessions are made in almost all the rituals so that poor people can participate in them too, even if their means are dalim and hadalim, the poorest of the poor. I think a very, very big, tremendous statement on the part of Sefer Vayikra.
Yeah, and actually, my teacher, Reuven Hammer, once wrote that, ever since Achad Ha'am wrote his essay, Kohen V'Navi, Priest and Prophet, it has been taken for granted that those two types of religious leadership, the prophet stands far superior to the priest in passionate devotion to morality and ethical ideas. Indeed, the priests and priestly literature were often maligned by Protestant biblical critics in the 19th century. He said there may be some truth to Achad Ha'am's contention. However, he goes on to write about how the priestly texts and so much of the Tanakh, again, has this sense of compassion and concern and moral and passion about moral issues. So
I'll just throw in also kind of on Yudi's point, an archaeological note that Mazar at the excavations close to just south of the Kotel discovered a stone, basically limestone, the local limestone, with a picture of a bird on it and the inscription Korban.
Right. I remember reading about that.
So apparently, we don't know that stone can't speak, but maybe this was allowed even for something that didn't have any other means.
Oh, the first chapter of Vayikra tells you an Allah can be a bird.
Yeah,
They're graduated offerings.
I'm saying, in other words, it's very interesting that an Allah can be a bird, but a Shlamim cannot be a bird. Why? Because a bird does not provide enough meat to sit down and share a meal between your family and Hashem. Okay, but an Allah all goes to Hashem, so consequently, it can be a bird.
Yeah, so let me just looking here.
I've had a lot of meals with just chicken and side dishes.
The only birds you can put on the altar are turtle doves and some species that I think are called today pigeons. Not sure about that. Rabbi Zucker probably can do better with us than I can. It's Torimu B'nai Yonah. No other birds. Birds could be kosher to eat. That does not mean they're kosher to put on the altar. Same thing goes with animals. Deer are kosher to eat, but they're not kosher to put on the altar. The idea is what puts on the altar has to be a sacrifice in a sense of it's something domestic. Even, turtle doves have a way of hanging out and bird in little recesses of people's homes. The Tanakh talks about this, and even we do that. We set up bird houses so the bird will hang out right next to our home. But that's the basic idea. The sacrifice is more of a sacrifice if what you're bringing is something that is truly your own and a domesticated creature and not a creature which primarily lives in the wild. I know you'll say chickens are domesticated now too, but they were not domesticated in the time of the Tanakh.
Mhm. I'm just looking.
Tanakh barely knows of their existence.
Mhm. I know he makes a comment on it, but I just don't remember exactly where it is. But it doesn't matter. It's still important to recognize. I mean, it's something that stands out is that for most offerings, there's a graduated system that, depending on what one can afford. Now, there are certain things, like you said, a shlamim, certain sacrifices that have
Even
to be
that's
brought.
graduated. It's just that you can't give anything lower than a goat. I mean,
Right.
it has to have a minimal amount to eat both for the people and for Hashem.
Mhm.
But shlamim can go from a cow to a goat. That's a pretty big graduation.
Yeah. So I felt it was still important that we should cover something actually in the text of the parasha. Although thinking about Vayikra, I mean, we're about to start an entire book. Some of these ideas of thinking about the book is very important. But I just want to take a look quickly at a very famous line we know. V'chol korban minchatcha b'melech timlach. Every offering of grain or cereal, you should salt with salt. V'lo tashbit melach brit Elohecha me'al minchatecha. The salt of the covenant of your God should not be absent from your grain offerings, your meal offerings. Al kol korbanecha takriv melach, on all of your sacrifice or your offerings, you must add salt. And I think we're aware of that. And that, of course, becomes transmitted into our eating practices, is that when we make hamotzi, we dip the bread in salt. We should also take a look at where kind of this comes from. First of all, Rashi comes in with the Midrash, because the salt of your covenant, the covenant was established with the salt from the 6 days of creation, when the lower waters, that is the oceans, received an assurance that they would be offered on the altar in the form of salt, and also the libation of the water on Chag. So coming out of the Midrash that, back in the creation of the world, the waters wanted to know that they too would be part of the rites that serve God. So, salt will be offered to all the sacrifices. That comes, of course, from the waters. And then you have the water libation ceremony on Chag. Ibn Ezra.
But that's fresh water, Rabbi Bobke. That's not salt water.
I know, that's what I found.
That's cute, but I think you have to examine it more carefully.
Yeah, but I just brought in Rashi because that's Rashi. We have to take a look at what he has to say. It comes up with a midrashic response. Ibn Ezra, a little bit more direct. Your covenant with God caused you to enter the covenant. Hichnisiticha bivrit v'hishpaticha shelo takriv tefel v'lo yochal kihu derech bizayon. You can't offer anything that's unsalted, inedible, for that's insulting. And even though they didn't believe that God was eating these sacrifices, there is a certain sense that you have to offer them as well as you would offer them if you were eating them.
as if the prince was eating them.
Yeah,
Remember, Malachi says that rotten carbon that you bring, hakrivehuna lepecha techa.
right.
That's next week. We're reading that. I don't know if we'll read it in next week, but we're reading Malachi Shabbat HaGadol.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, just basic sense is that we're going to offer things properly. Would someone like to read this answer of Bechor Shor? All this is leading up to Milgram's commentary. Somebody like to read the salt of your covenant with God?
Yeah, I'll do it. The
Okay,
salt of your covenant with God. Salt is a preservative. Therefore, the Blessed Holy One commanded it is offered with the cereal offerings and with the sacrifices to demonstrate that the sacrifices are the eternal covenant and atonement. It was already explained that everyone knows that the Blessed Holy One needs it neither for smell nor for offering, but rather to grant merit to Israel through them as a person sins and brings an offering that makes atonement for him. And he knows that he is clean and is more careful not to dirty himself with sin.
so, you know, it's part of the whole system of the korbanot. And again, what is the role of the korbanot? And then we have Shadal Lutzato.
The salt of your covenant with God. Until this very day, Arab leaders, when they make a covenant, bring a vessel of salt and eat together bread and salt. Now, this was a well-known custom in ancient times in lands of the East, that the covenant is made with salt, and therefore every offering is to satisfy and appease God and to bring us into a covenant with him. Therefore, God commanded to include salt with every offering and called that salt the salt of your covenant with God, because with it you make a covenant with your God.
Yeah, when a covenant is a relationship, again, going back to the notion that, you know, when we are offering a korban, we're bringing ourselves into a relationship with God. And now we can read Milgram, who is certainly drawing on all of these.
The salt of your covenant with God. The idiom Melech Brit Elohecha is used again to refer to the binding character of the priestly prerequisites and of the Davidic
I typed that
dynasty.
wrong. Or it just could be some unusual
No,
word
it's
that,
correct. It's not prerequisites, it's prerequisites. Prerequisites are things you have to do
Prerequisites.
before you do something. Prerequisites are perquisites are entitlements. Matno
oh,
kahuna.
that's true.
And that's what that chapter is about. Matno kahuna.
Right. But, you know, I'm just this word.
Perquisites.
Perquisites, which is just not one I'm familiar with. And that's,
Yeah, that's very fancy English.
yeah, and I'm used to reading Milgram, and I studied with Fishbane. You know, they don't speak in normal English. But they do it naturally. That's the wild thing. They're not showing off. That's just how they talk.
Perquisites, I'm reading. A
Uh-huh.
thing regarded as a special right or privilege enjoyed as a result of one's position.
There you go.
There you go.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
Matnot Kohanim. Okay, anyway, go on. So we have it for the priestly.
and of the Davidic dynasty.
Okay.
Salt was the preservative par excellence in antiquity. A figurative extension of its preservative properties is the reference to the apostles as the salt of the earth, Matthew. In other words,
Into
teachers,
modern Hebrew,
Pardon me?
which that term has actually come from the New Testament into modern Hebrew. Melech haaretz are the people who are demonstrated in the streets of Tel Aviv right now against the judicial reform.
Oh,
They keep saying that.
no,
Melech
I haven't
haaretz.
seen, interestingly, I haven't seen that. But, you know,
I'll
it's just kind
send
of
you
funny
a
because it
Haaretz
came
article.
from our tradition. Brit Melach, you know, it comes into Matthew, and now it's come back to us.
in other words, teachers who guard the world against moral decay. Moreover, its preservation, preservative qualities make it the ideal symbol of her durability of a covenant.
Yeah, we would
Like
probably just say
fancy ones there.
durability but
A Neo-Babylonian letter speaks of all who tasted the salt of the Jakin tribe.
yeah, you'll
referring
forgive
to
me,
the
I
tri-
did not put in all the references. You can look in Milgram if you really want to look up all of these ancient Near Eastern texts.
referring to the tribe's covenantal allies. Loyalty to the
Persian.
spelling there, Persian monarch is described as having tasted the salt of the palace. Arab milhat, a derivative of malaha, to salt, means a treaty. There is salt between us implies among Arab Bedouin a treaty stipulating mutual aid and defense. The Greeks likewise salted their covenant meals and referred to salt as holy. Thus, it is likely that in covenant meals, excuse me. Thus, it is likely that in Israel as well, salt played a central role at the solemn meal,
Yes.
the solemn meal that sealed the covenant. Salt was deemed so essential in Ezekiel's vision of the restoration that he makes room for marshes and swamps in his otherwise fertile land to provide salt. Why is this injunction of salt all sacrifices inserted here with the cereal offerings rather than with any of the clearly more important blood sacrifices? Bravenel suggests that because bread normally contains flour, leaven, and salt, the question would naturally arise. If leaven is forbidden in the cereal offering, should not salt also be forbidden?
That's just the Barbanel's suggestion. But as you can see that a lot of the ideas that were already picked up in our traditional Mefarshim, this is what Milgram finds in his research. And then finally, the last part, the halacha.
A little strange though is he's not citing anything from Masechet Menachot. I'd be really interested to know, and here my knowledge does not go that far, which is in the Mishnah and the Babli, and when they discuss, salt and carbonate, do they mean akal carbon melech that also was put on animals, or does it simply mean that akal carbon is a kolel for all grain? That goes into a sacrifice. I mean, in other words, Milgram generally, the first thing he'll do is tell you what the rabbis have to say.
Mhm.
So I'm a little puzzled by this, but okay, something
Yeah,
to do.
I didn't have a chance because there were just so many references, and I really haven't studied Menachot. So I just so there's
having a discussion with that woman you brought here once. She was wild about my second Eruvin, which I can't make any sense out of. And I told her I was wild about my second Menachot, and she said, "Well, I can't make any sense of that one."
Yeah, my friend Professor Dr. Devorah Weisberg. Mhm. Yeah. So anyway, the halacha for what we do.
One does not break until they bring before him salt or dip.
Now that's how I translated liftan, but that's not necessarily the best translation for liftan. What is a better? Anybody think of a better translation?
I think it's translated as turnips most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I'm always saying that's if you read the Mishnah, Masechet Zerayim, and they mention the word liftan, the English translation is generally turnips, but I've never gotten involved with it because I really don't have any experience with turnips.
Yeah. They're good in chicken soup, but in preparing chicken soup.
Yes.
Anyway,
they
so
are.
go on.
Rashi's comment, anything that is eaten with bread, to dip into it the piece of the broken bread. If it were plain or seasoned with spices or salt like ours, or one intended to eat the bread dry, one need not wait.
Yeah,
Lost.
so.
In any case, it is a mitzvah to bring to the table salt before one breaks the bread, because the table is like the altar and the eating like the offering, as it is said, on all your offerings bring salt. Beit Yosef, in the name of Shibboleth Haleket, this protects against punishment.
Yeah, there's a whole, apparently a whole Ashkenazic.
This is coming from the Ramah, and he's quoting, of all people, the Beit Yosef, which is the author of the Shulchan Aruch is the same author as the Beit Yosef.
No, actually,
Haleket
notice
is an
this is,
Italian work.
no, this is Israelis. It's
I'm
the
saying
gloss,
the Ramah is Isserlis.
right?
Yeah, right.
So that's why he can quote the Beit Yosef. But the protection against punishment, there's a whole bit of folklore about this is, protects against Satan. I'm not familiar with it. I've just seen references to it, and I didn't have time to trace it, because I also know that
Well, it's going back to 13th century Italy. Shibboleth Haleket is really a good book to read. And basically, it was in Italy and in time and Renaissance. That book was the Shulchan Aruch. Okay,
Yeah.
That's basically the book that every Jew in Italy looked for and looked into when they went into halacha. So it would really be interesting to know what in heaven's name did salt play in pre-Renaissance Italy. I mean, you're opening up awful lot of issues here, Rabbi Papke. Very interesting.
Yeah, I did. David Golinkin always liked to talk about Shibboleth Haleket, because he's always so thorough in looking at halachic sources. And I didn't know about the whole folkloric side of fighting against Satan, demons. I know, going back to the Zohar, there are various interpretations of things that happen at the meal, that you're giving something to the Sitra Achra, so again, that's far
I
more.
look in Trachtenberg for stuff on that.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably the place to look.
I would just throw in the importance of salt. It's so common and so easily attainable, but in my visit to Ethiopia in 1986, when we went to the Beit Yisrael villages, there were people that had not had, and they had horrible goiters. And if you don't have salt in your food supply, it's bad for you. There are
But you're
very
not going to use that.
significant
But how does that relate to the issue at hand? The one thing the carbonate are not there for is for your health. I mean, that's pushing it. Okay. I mean, if we're going to get a dietitian on board here and let them analyze the carbonate and what the recipe is and how they're all put together from a dietary point of view, I think that would be very interesting. But
I'm just saying that salt is really essential. That's my only. That's my only.
I'm sorry. If it has iodine, but regular salt doesn't have
That's true.
what you need.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Good point.
But it goes back to the sense
thank
that
God we have a
he
lady.
felt that salt was tremendously important as a preservative for adding taste, to they may have had goiter in Ethiopia. Here in the United States, almost any packaged or canned product has enough as your
Iodized
your
salt.
need for salt for a month. Especially the
By which way iodized salt is not kosher for Pesach.
right.
So for
Okay.
8 days, you don't need it.
Yeah.
Right.
Besides, there's so much salt in everything
And
else.
If you did, there'd be
that
no,
like
Madeline, if you did need it, you'd have absolutely no problem getting a heter from
Right.
your local Orthodox rabbi. Forget about, conservative and reform rabbi. So operationally speaking, I think we're getting a little afield now. The point of discussing the salt and the carbon we have not solved. Okay.
Yeah.
with all the talk about using salt as a preservative, that doesn't mean that that's why it's in the carbon. I mean,
No, I think that,
that doesn't mean that at all.
I think it goes
We
back,
have, you know,
as Milgram pointed out, and even Shadal, and that this was something that was very much part of the ancient world. And the whole idea of if a covenant is being sealed with a meal, well, the basic meal is kind of pat b'melach, bread and salt. So clearly it's a covenantal symbol. What else may go into this? There's a lot.
forget about that. That's me.
Okay, yeah, and I've got to run to my chavruta. So everybody have a good
That's my
day.
chavruta.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
All right. Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom. And
shalom,
Chodesh
Rabbi.
Tov again.
Yishar kochacha.
Okay, let me figure out how I end all of this.